autumn morning cast a cold gray hue over the quiet cemetery. Cassian Villaro walked slowly between rows of leafless trees, holding in his hand the bouquet of white flowers he brought every year. Today marked the 5th anniversary of Evelyn's death, the only woman who had ever truly moved his heart. Since she passed, Cassian had lived like a shadow in the dazzling world he had built. $1 million meetings, lightning-fast closed deals, and lavish parties that no longer held any taste. He no longer believed in healing. He only came here out of habit, the only place where he still felt like a real person, not a CEO. When he arrived at the familiar gravestone etched with Evelyn's name, Cassian suddenly froze. In front of her grave, a small boy around 6 years old was sitting curled up, hugging his knees, his deep black eyes staring at the portrait photo on the headstone. The boy wore an old coat. His small hands were dirty, but his face had an oddly calm expression, as if he had been here many times before. Cassian approached and spoke in a soft, low voice. "Who did you come here with? Child?" The boy looked up, his gaze meeting Cassian's. No fear, no hesitation, only a strange seriousness for a child. "I came to see my mom. Her name is Evelyn. This is my mom's grave." Cassian's heart tightened. He thought he had misheard, but the boy repeated it again, more clearly. "I am Evelyn's son. My name is Liam." He stood still. Inside his mind, a chorus of chaotic echoes erupted. Evelyn had a child? What was this boy saying? Evelyn had never been pregnant during the time they lived together. They had been together for nearly 8 years, and he had always believed there were no secrets between them. Evelyn was gentle, reserved, but sincere. She loved him with a simplicity and tenderness that gave him peace in a chaotic world. And now, in front of her grave, a strange boy was claiming to be her son. Cassian looked at the child more closely. Slightly tousled black hair, intelligent eyes, a high and straight nose, fair, rosy skin, all like a miniature replica of Evelyn. Something in the boy's face sent a shiver down Cassian's spine. He sat down beside him, not knowing which question to start with. "Who do you live with? Who brought you here?" Liam turned away, looking toward the distant trees. "I live at the Hope Orphanage. Grandma Joan brought me. She said my mom's name is Evelyn. She passed away, and every year she brings me here once to visit." Cassian swallowed hard. The boy's final words struck him like a blow. Why had Evelyn never said anything? Why, through all those years together, did he never know she had a child? Or was this boy mistaken? But deep down, he knew. That gaze, that voice, they weren't random. The late autumn wind swept through, knocking a few dry leaves onto the gravestone. Cassian could hear nothing now but the sound of his own heavy breathing. In that moment, he felt like a stranger in his own life, where a great truth was slowly revealing itself, beginning with a child he had never known, who would turn everything upside down. The name Liam kept echoing in Cassian's mind the entire way home from the cemetery. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt so bewildered. How could a child know Evelyn's name, know where she was buried, and more importantly, be certain that he was her son? Cassian had lived with Evelyn for nearly 8 years. She had always been by his side like a gentle light, unassuming, never causing trouble. They had talked about having children, about the future, and never once had Evelyn mentioned having given birth. The next day, Cassian went to the Hope Orphanage, the place Liam had said he lived. The iron gate opened, leading him into a world entirely different from the one where he held business conferences and private board meetings. Children played in the yard, laughter mingled with the sound of a lesson being taught in a small room at the end of the hallway. No one here knew he was a millionaire CEO, the man once featured on the cover of a top business magazine. Here, he was just a stranger asking questions about a boy named Liam. Ms. Joan, the head of the orphanage, was a silver-haired woman with sharp eyes but a calm demeanor. When Cassian mentioned Evelyn's name, she was silent for a few seconds, then let out a long breath. "Yes, Evelyn did come here," she said, her gaze filled with hesitation. "Not many times, but I remember her. She brought Liam when he was just a few days old. She didn't say much. just left a short letter and a bracelet engraved with the name Liam. Then she disappeared. Cassian clenched his fists. Why didn't she tell me? We lived together for almost a decade. I don't understand. Ms. Joan didn't respond directly. She simply took an old envelope from a drawer. Inside was the worn-out letter Evelyn had left behind. I can't take care of the baby right now, but I will come back. Please don't blame me. If possible, help my child be loved. That handwriting, Cassian recognized it immediately. It was Evelyn's. He said nothing more. No one could explain better than Evelyn, but she was gone forever. A part of her life, one he had never known, now stood before him clearly in the form of a boy named Liam. A part she had hidden until her final breath. On the way back, Cassian remained silent. He couldn't blame Evelyn, but he also couldn't ignore Liam's existence. Though he didn't yet have all the answers, he decided to bring the boy home, at the very least to protect him, to understand, and more importantly, to face the truth. That same day, he hired a private investigation team. Cassian needed to know everything, from Liam's birthplace, medical records, to any possible information about his biological father. Evelyn may have chosen silence, but Cassian would not do the same. For the child, and for the heart now stirred by a secret left unsaid by the woman he had loved, Cassian returned to the Hope Orphanage on a late afternoon, when the sun had dipped behind the trees and darkness had begun to fall over the quiet playground. He brought with him Evelyn's old letter, his heart full of questions no one could answer anymore. In the small office, Mrs. Joan waited for him with a thin folder in her hands. She sat down across from him, her eyes calm and carrying something like an apology for someone who was no longer here. There are things I once thought should not be said, she began, her voice even and soft. But now, I think you deserve to know, from the pages of the file, from the quiet memories of the elderly woman. The pieces of a secret once thought buried began to surface. Evelyn came to the Hope Orphanage on a rainy night, her belly already heavy with child. She didn't give her real name, only called herself Anna. Her eyes then, according to Mrs. Joan, were those of someone who had lost every place to cling to, but still tried to hold on to the last bit of dignity. She didn't complain, didn't ask for much, only pleaded for a temporary shelter to give birth. The boy was born not long after, healthy, and was named Liam, a name Evelyn herself had chosen. She held her baby only once, for a long time. Then early the next morning, while everyone else was still asleep, she left the child with a letter and a small silver bracelet and disappeared as if she had never been there. Cassian was speechless hearing each detail. In his mind, Evelyn was always the gentle, reserved but sincere woman. He had believed they shared everything. The pain, the desires, the unfinished dreams. And yet, she had lived with a secret too big to imagine. She had been pregnant, had given birth, had struggled alone in solitude. And he, the husband who was supposed to be closest to her, knew nothing at all. Why? The question slipped from his lips like a choked cry. Why didn't she tell me? Why did she keep it from me? Mrs. Joan looked at him for a long time before answering. Maybe she thought you wouldn't accept it. Or maybe she just wanted to hold on to something that wouldn't hurt anyone. I once asked Evelyn when she came back to visit Liam. She said, I can't bring him home, but I can't live without him. And I can't let him suffer because of something I once did wrong. Cassian lowered his head. His throat tightened, his heart clenched as if someone had grabbed it. Evelyn had come to visit Liam many times, standing silently and watching her son from afar. She lived between two worlds, trying to be a mother without breaking her role as a wife. Everything she did, hiding, staying silent, enduring, was because she was afraid of losing him. And now, he was the one losing everything. Memories of Evelyn rushed back like waves crashing ashore. The morning she cooked light meals, the nights reading by the window, the gentle hugs every time he came home exhausted. Amid those little things, there was a silent storm she had borne alone. Evelyn had once been his entire world, But he never knew she also had a world of her own, where a child had once cried for the first time in her arms. Cassian left the orphanage as the streetlights lit up. His steps were heavy, as if burdened with the guilt of a man who had just realized that the love of his life wasn't as perfect as he once believed, and that he hadn't been there when she needed him most. But deep inside, alongside the pain, was something else, a silent promise to himself. If Evelyn once chose silence to protect their child, then now he would choose to speak up to protect that boy in her place. No longer to run away, but to make amends for a past that had never been revealed. The black car glided through the long streets, turning onto the stone-paved road that led up to a high-rise building nestled in the heart of the city. Cassian sat silently behind the wheel, while Liam, the 6-year-old boy just brought from the orphanage, rested his head against the window, staring distantly, saying nothing. In his hand, he still clutched the silver bracelet engraved with his name. Cassian glanced at the boy several times through the rearview mirror, unable to put anything into words, though his mind was more tangled than ever. The penthouse on the 49th floor opened with an automatic door. The soft white light from the ceiling spread across the sleek, modern interior, where everything was orderly to the point of coldness. This was where Cassian had lived for many years, surrounded by spotless glass walls, expensive paintings, and dinners eaten alone. He had once seen this stillness as necessary for work, for thinking, for the memories he didn't dare name. But today, as the small boy stepped cautiously into the house, the space seemed to change. Liam didn't ask anything. He just looked around, taking careful steps as though afraid of breaking something. Cassian wasn't used to introducing his home, much less to the presence of a child. He cleared his throat softly, trying to keep his voice calm. "Make yourself at home. The room on the left is yours. It has a private bathroom." Liam nodded slightly, showing little expression. He didn't ask who Cassian was, didn't demand anything. He simply set his backpack down on the floor, then turned and stood by the dining table, hands clasped together. His eyes were still cautious, but they didn't avoid him. That evening, Cassian stepped into the kitchen for the first time in ages, normally only used for making coffee or pouring wine. He didn't know what to cook for a child. After rummaging through the cabinets, he settled on simple fried eggs and chicken soup. He made them clumsily, with no recipe. The eggs burned at the edges, the soup too watery. But when he placed the plate in front of Liam, the boy neither criticized nor refused. He bowed his head and said, "Thank you," then ate slowly, politely, like a miniature adult. Cassian sat across from him, watching as he sipped a glass of cold water. The meal passed in silence. No clattering cutlery, no lively conversation like in other families. But in that silence, Cassian felt something he'd never sensed here before. Life. After dinner, Liam instinctively brought his dishes to the sink. When Cassian stopped him and said it wasn't necessary, the boy simply smiled and replied, "At the orphanage, we did everything ourselves." That night, as Cassian walked past the small bedroom meant for Liam, he saw the boy sitting on the bed, hugging a pillow and staring up at the ceiling. On the nightstand was the small photo of Evelyn that he had brought from the orphanage. The boy's voice rang out just as Cassian was about to leave. "You know, my mom used to sing lullabies. That's what Ms. Jones said. But I've never heard one." Cassian turned back, his heart sinking. He walked over and sat beside the bed. "I miss her a lot," Liam continued, eyes still fixed on the photo. "But I don't know who my dad is. Ms. Jones said maybe he doesn't even know I exist." Cassian didn't reply. He just gave a slight nod, then gently placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Do you want to know who he is?" he asked softly. Liam looked up at him wide-eyed and clear. "I just want someone to be here," he whispered. "Doesn't have to be a dad. Just stay." Those words left Cassian breathless for a few seconds. In that moment, he was no longer a CEO, no longer the grieving husband who had lost his wife, but a man sitting beside a child who wanted the simplest thing, a home. And for the first time, he knew he couldn't turn away. Not out of duty, but because he had just realized maybe he needed the same thing too. The days that followed passed with a strange rhythm Cassian had never experienced before. A schedule once revolving around meetings, partners, and dry numbers now had to make room for things that seemed simple but foreign. Choosing unsweetened milk because Liam didn't like sweet things, checking the water temperature before a bath, folding small towels so the boy wouldn't slip in the shiny bathroom. At first, Cassian had only planned to let Liam stay for a few days, until the full truth could be verified. But every time he saw the child sitting quietly by the wide glass window looking down at the city, or crouching to rearrange old toys as if afraid of disturbing anyone, he couldn't bring himself to let go. There was something in the boy's eyes that made him unable to look away. The first time Cassian took Liam shopping for clothes was on a Saturday afternoon. The boy chose only a few simple items: a dark blue hoodie, a pair of well-fitted jeans, and ordinary sneakers. Cassian had thought children were usually demanding, asking for things. But Liam wasn't like that. He simply nodded in thanks when asked, and always turned to ask permission before trying something new. That calmness stirred something in him. "You don't like superheroes or anything?" Cassian asked, his tone gentler than usual. Liam looked at him, then quietly said, "I prefer fairy tales. In those stories, there's always someone who comes back for the child who was left behind." Cassian froze, his heart tightening for a moment. That evening, he tried telling the boy a Grimm's fairy tale. His voice at first was stiff, as if reading a contract, but Liam lay still, listening intently, his eyes wide open beneath the thin blanket. "Afterward," he whispered, "you tell it better than I thought." A simple comment, but Cassian felt his heart strangely soften. Then one day, while the two were walking in the park near home, Liam suddenly grabbed his hand. That small, warm hand made the man who was used to power and cold handshakes feel awkward. "Are you ever scared?" Liam asked casually, his eyes still watching a flock of pigeons in the distance. Cassian turned, surprised by the question. "Scared of what?" "Scared of having no one by your side. Scared of being alone." He remained silent. In that moment, the years of solitary living in his luxury apartment replayed like a slow-motion reel. Dinners with wine and business news. Sleepless nights rereading emails just to avoid thinking about the emptiness. And he knew. The answer was yes, but no one had ever asked him that before. No one had ever looked at him. The man praised for being resilient, strong, and asked whether he was afraid. "Yes," he whispered, like a confession. "I used to be very scared." Liam said nothing more, but his hand squeezed a little tighter. From that day on, Cassian no longer called Liam child. He began writing the boy's name in his personal notebook, scheduling vaccinations, making dentist appointments. He told his assistant to cancel unnecessary weekend parties, spending time instead taking Liam to book streets, visiting museums, and buying a small cactus to plant on his study desk. With each small act, each exchanged glance, Cassian felt a deepening connection. No longer pity, not obligation, but something more sacred, as if a once barren heart was being nourished by gentle warmth from a small soul. He made a silent promise to himself, not to let this child suffer any more pain, not to let him be torn by adult secrets or schemes, not to let anyone take away the sense of safety he was slowly reclaiming. Whatever happened, he would be there, the one grown-up who would not walk away. Because for the first time in years, Cassian understood. There are things money can't buy, but they can be kept with the heart. One early weekday morning, as the sunlight was just peeking between the tall buildings, Cassian sat quietly in his office, holding the thick file that had been placed on his desk the night before. This was the result of a private investigation he had commissioned. Information never made public. Clues once thought insignificant now pieced together into a raw, undeniable truth. The name at the top of the first page: Mark Donovan, tech billionaire, global investor, the man who had once been Cassian's greatest rival in the business world. A ruthless, cold-blooded individual, ready to devour anyone in his path. And now, that name was tied to something unimaginable, Liam's biological father. Cassian read through every detail carefully. The investigation had retraced old records from the Hope Orphanage, searching for anyone who had assisted Evelyn during childbirth. A retired nurse confirmed. Evelyn had once come to a private hospital under a false name, alone, without any family accompanying her. But later, she returned once, inquiring about a DNA test. She wanted to determine a biological connection, without explaining why. The file was opened, the sample taken, but Evelyn never received the results. Because before the scheduled day to receive them, she had died in a car accident. Cassian closed his eyes. The entire world seemed to go silent for a few seconds. Evelyn had tried to find the truth, but she never had the chance to learn it. And now, the only person who held that truth was him. The final page of the report bore a bold confirmation. Liam is the biological son of Mark Donovan, based on a genetic match retrieved from the International Civil DNA Database. Cassian set the file down and leaned back in his chair. His breathing grew heavy. Part of him felt relieved for finally knowing the truth, but an even greater part was filled with fear. Not fear of losing reputation or influence, but fear of losing Liam. If Mark knew, if Mark discovered that the son he never knew existed was now living in Cassian's home, would he stay silent? Or would he see it as another business transaction? Another opportunity to compete, just like every time on the battlefield of commerce. Cassian had witnessed Mark eliminate opponents using the cruelest methods: manipulation, lawsuits, even smear campaigns. To Mark, everything could be possessed, even people. And Liam, that fragile little boy, could he withstand such a ruthless tug of war? He stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city below. Inside him was a silent vow. Liam would not become anyone's asset. He was not a pawn in a corporate game. He was a child, a small soul once abandoned, now finally having the chance to feel the real warmth of a family. Cassian decided to keep the truth hidden, at least for now. He locked the file inside his private safe in the office, telling no one, not even Liam, because that boy deserved to live peaceful days, untouched by matters even adults weren't ready to face. That evening, as Cassian and Liam sat together eating toast that Cassian had made himself, he quietly observed the boy. Liam was talking excitedly about a new book he'd borrowed from the library. He had no idea that just a few steps away, behind that door, lay a truth that could change his entire life. But Cassian looked into those bright eyes and told himself, "Not yet. Let the boy laugh a little longer. Let him live like a child for one more day." And in that moment, he knew he would do everything in his power to protect that boy, as if he were his very own flesh and blood. That afternoon, the sky was gray, as if covered by a thin layer of smoke. Wind swept through the tall glass windows of the penthouse, gently stirring the white curtains, creating a faint sound like the sighs of a nameless city. Cassian stood by the window, holding a warm cup of tea he had yet to drink. His eyes were thoughtfully fixed on the streets below, where tiny cars crowded together, where people rushed by with nameless worries. But in his heart at that moment, there was only one thing: Liam. He had kept the truth for too long enough to know that continuing would be a betrayal, and he didn't want to betray that boy, the child who had entered his life like a quiet breeze, only to stir a heart once thought frozen forever. Cassian stepped into the small study room where Liam was drawing. The boy was focused on coloring an unfinished picture: a house with a wooden fence, a big old tree, and a man carrying a small child on his shoulders. When he saw Cassian standing silently behind him, Liam looked up, his eyes as bright as always. "I'm drawing us," he said, smiling gently. "Like the time you took me to the park." Cassian nodded, sitting down beside him. He didn't know how to begin, but then, as with all the important things in life, he chose the simplest way: the truth. "Liam," he said softly and slowly, "there's something I haven't told you about your biological father." The colored pencil in Liam's hand paused. He didn't look up, but Cassian knew he was listening. "Your father is a very rich, Very famous man. His name is Mark Donovan, but he never knew you existed. The room seemed to freeze for a few seconds. Liam set the pencil down and slowly turned to him. Really? Cassian nodded. I've investigated. The DNA test confirmed it. Evelyn, your mother, tried to do it before she passed, but she didn't make it in time. Liam stayed quiet for a long time. His eyes wavered, no longer as calm as usual. He lowered his head, then asked softly, as if afraid of his own question. If he finds out, will he come and take me away? Cassian exhaled slowly, then sat closer, placing his hand on the boy's shoulder. No one can take you if you don't want to go. I'm here, Liam. Not because you're someone's child, but because you're you. Liam looked directly at him. The gaze of a child once abandoned but still yearning to be held onto. In that look, Cassian saw the pain on the verge of becoming tears. But Liam didn't cry. He only whispered, barely audible, I don't want to go anywhere. Cassian tightened his grip on that small shoulder, like a silent vow, and I won't let anyone scare you ever again. That night, Liam didn't eat much. He also didn't read like he usually did. But when Cassian passed by the room, he saw the light still on. Liam was sitting by the window, hugging his knees, eyes gazing into the night sky. Cassian walked in, said nothing, just sat beside him. A long while later, Liam spoke softly. If Mom were still alive, she probably would have told me sooner. She would never let me be afraid. Cassian nodded. Your mother did everything to protect you, and now I will continue that. Liam didn't reply, but he leaned his head against Cassian's shoulder for the first time, like a child who had finally found a place to rest after many days of pretending to be strong. Outside, the wind still blew, but inside Cassian, for the first time in many years, was a deep silence. Not loneliness, but the presence of a promise meant to be kept for a lifetime. Early Monday morning, the atmosphere inside the Villaro Group building buzzed with its usual rhythm. Employees flowing in and out of elevators like clockwork, phones ringing non-stop, documents being rushed from one office to another. But Cassian sensed something was off the moment he stepped into the private meeting room on the top floor, the space where he usually received only the highest level partners. Sitting calmly on the gray sofa facing the window was a man who looked as though he owned the place. Mark Donovan. Cassian paused for a second, then walked in. The door closed behind him with a soft thud, sealing in a silence like the calm before a storm. Mark looked exactly as he had the last time they met. A perfectly tailored luxury suit, neatly combed silver-streaked hair, and the sharp gaze of someone far too familiar with winning. He stood and extended a hand in polite diplomacy. Cassian didn't take it. His eyes were firm, showing not a single wrinkle of surprise or welcome. Cassian, Mark began, his voice steady. I came because of Liam. Cassian didn't reply immediately. He walked to the desk, slowly set down his briefcase, then turned to face him. You came for the boy, he emphasized. After all these years of not knowing you had a son? Mark didn't flinch. I didn't know. If I had, things would have been different. Cassian curled his lips, but no smile formed. Different how? You'd claim your son by sending a legal team to fight for custody? Or maybe try to buy him like you'd buy controlling shares in a company? Mark exhaled. I'm not here to fight. I just want to meet him, to tell him that I regret. Cassian stared at the man before him for a long moment. All these years, Mark Donovan had been a symbol of dominance, a man who never retreated, never humbled himself. Today, for the first time, he wasn't wearing his armor. You don't have the right to demand anything, Cassian said slowly. I'm not Liam's biological father, but I've taken care of him, held him when he had nightmares, cooked his breakfast, and listened when he cried for his mother. And you're just a name he learned a few days ago. Mark stayed silent. This isn't a business deal, Mark, Cassian continued, his tone colder. This is the life of a child who was left behind, who grew up in an orphanage. He's not a piece of property to be negotiated, not something you can restore to polish your public image. Mark quietly sat down, his hands clasped together, his gaze stripped of arrogance. I'm not trying to take him from you. Cassian, I know that wouldn't be right. I just want to let him know I exist, that if one day he needs me, I'll be there. Silence blanketed the room for a long while. Finally, Mark pulled a cream-colored envelope from his inner jacket pocket and placed it on the table. This is a letter I wrote for him. No pressure, Just a few words from someone who came too late. Cassian looked at the envelope, then back at Mark. He gave a small nod, not of agreement, but simply to end the meeting. "You should go," he said, voice calm but firm. "I'll give the letter to Liam, and if he wants to see you, he'll say so himself." Mark nodded, stood up. Before leaving, he paused, his eyes quiet. "Thank you for taking care of him." Cassian didn't respond. The door closed behind Mark, leaving behind a heavy silence. Cassian stared at the envelope resting on the table, heart weighed down. He didn't know what Liam would think, but he knew the boy needed time, and he would be the one standing there, no matter what Liam chose. Because sometimes, loving someone isn't about holding on tight. It's about being strong enough to wait. That afternoon, sunlight streamed through the shaded tree canopies in front of the restaurant nestled within an upscale, secluded neighborhood, a place typically reserved for members of the upper class. The atmosphere was strangely quiet, broken only by the soft chime of wind bells each time the door opened. Cassian sat beside Liam in the black car parked out front. The boy said nothing, only stared at the white card in his hand, a handwritten invitation from Mark Donovan himself. It had been a week since Cassian gave him the letter Mark had left. Liam hadn't said anything when he received it, just silently read it, then folded it and carefully placed it in the small drawer beside his bed. In the days that followed, he never brought it up, nor asked any questions. Cassian respected that silence. No pressure, no prompting. But this morning, Liam approached him on his own, speaking softly in a quiet voice. "I want to meet him." Cassian was surprised, but simply nodded. They arranged a meeting, and now, at the threshold of an encounter with unknown outcomes, he looked at the boy with deep empathy. He couldn't shield Liam from every pain, but he could stand right beside him, as a silent anchor. "Are you ready?" Cassian asked gently. Liam nodded, his eyes showing no sign of worry, as Cassian had expected. But he knew, deep within those eyes, a storm of emotions was waiting to be released. The restaurant door opened. The receptionist guided them past elegantly arranged tables to a private room inside. Mark Donovan was already there, sitting upright, no blazer on. Just a middle-aged man in a simple dress shirt, his hands resting on the table, waiting with a trace of nervousness. When the door opened, he stood up abruptly, his eyes fixed on Liam. Liam paused for a second, staring at the man he had never met. No one spoke. No one smiled. But between them, an invisible string was being pulled taut. "Hello, son." Mark spoke first, his voice low and deep. Cassian quietly stepped away, leaving the two face to face. He stood just outside the glass door, far enough not to hear, but close enough to step in if Liam needed him. Liam sat across from Mark, his hands resting on the table's edge, eyes fixed on the glass of water just poured. "Thank you for coming," Mark continued, his face lacking the coldness of the news photos Cassian had once shown him. I don't know what to call myself to you, but I just want to say I'm sorry for not being there from the start." Liam still said nothing. Mark pulled a small box from his shirt pocket and gently slid it across the table. "These are a few photos of your mother back in the day. I kept them from our college years. I didn't know she had a child. If I had known, I wouldn't have." He hesitated, unable to finish the sentence. Liam picked up the box, flipped open the lid. Old photos, faded by time, appeared. Evelyn, young, smiling in the sunlight. The boy stared, unable to speak. His hand trembled slightly. "I didn't come here to change your life," Mark said, his voice lower. "I just want you to know that if one day you want to learn about me, you can ask anything, and if not, I'll understand. The choice is yours." Liam looked up. For the first time in the conversation, he stared directly at the man across from him. Not angry, not tearful. Just the gaze of a child who had learned to keep his heart steady after many losses. "I'll keep your letter," he said calmly, "and the photo box too. But I'm not ready to call you Dad. Maybe one day." But not now. Mark nodded, his eyes slightly red. I'll wait. The meeting ended like that. No drama, no tears. Just the quiet beginning of a fragile connection. When Cassian came in to pick up Liam, the boy said nothing. But as the two walked out of the restaurant, Liam held his hand tightly. No words were needed. Cassian understood. Even though the man in that room was his biological father, the man walking beside him now was the one who had truly been there when he needed someone the most. And for a child who had once been left behind, that was enough to move forward. The car glided silently along the tree-lined road, leaving behind the upscale restaurant, where for the first time in his life, Liam had met his biological father. The sky was nearing dusk, and the last golden rays of sunlight streamed through the car window, casting a quiet amber glow across the boy's face. Cassian glanced over at Liam, saying nothing, waiting for him to speak. The boy was clutching the photo box Mark had given him, holding it tightly as though it was something precious, but not yet ready to open it again. As they neared the apartment, Liam suddenly spoke, his voice soft and low but clear. Not as bad as I thought, but I'm not ready to forgive. Cassian turned, his gaze softening. He wasn't surprised. That answer didn't come from a 6-year-old, but from a soul who had experienced more pain than his age should have allowed. He nodded, an acknowledgement of understanding and respect. Take all the time you need, he said. I'll be here when you're ready. Just let me know. Liam didn't respond right away, but there was warmth in his eyes. Something was beginning to melt inside him. Not full forgiveness, but the start of a healing journey. And Cassian knew that meant more than any hasty words ever could. The familiar penthouse welcomed them back. The air inside was no longer cold. The faint scent of cookies from yesterday's baking still lingered in the kitchen. On the table sat an unfinished Lego set, Liam's castle in progress, with walls tall enough to protect the people inside, as he had once said. That night, Cassian didn't ask about the meeting. Instead, he played a game of tic-tac-toe with Liam, then watched a space documentary, Liam's latest fascination. Before bedtime, Liam turned and whispered, "Will you finish the fairy tale from last time?" Cassian smiled. He picked up the book, his warm, steady voice filling the room, lit only by a soft nightlight. The boy slowly closed his eyes, still holding Cassian's hand, as if afraid this peace might vanish like a dream. The days that followed passed with quiet but meaningful changes. Liam began to share more about his dreams, his questions about the universe, even hazy memories from the orphanage. He didn't mention Mark, nor ask about him. But the letter Mark had left still sat on his desk, placed beside a photo of his mother, part of a past he was slowly learning to face. One morning, while Cassian was making coffee, Liam shuffled into the kitchen with messy hair and a t-shirt too big for him. He climbed onto a stool, rubbing his eyes lazily. "Dad," he slipped, then paused. Cassian turned, hand frozen midair with the cup. Liam looked at him, flustered. It's okay," Cassian interrupted, his voice low and warm. "I like hearing you call me that." Liam said nothing more. He bowed his head, a shy smile forming. And from that moment on, no ceremony was needed. Cassian knew he had been accepted, not by blood, but by a heart that had chosen to stay. In the evenings that followed, the penthouse echoed with more laughter. They cooked together, even if they sometimes burned the eggs or turned the kitchen into a mess. Liam taught Cassian how to play video games, and Cassian taught Liam how to fold clothes. They went to the park on weekends and picked out a kitten they named Nova, because Liam said, "She's small like a newborn star." A home slowly took shape, not from perfection, but from broken pieces gently mended with patience and love. Cassian didn't try to replace Liam's past. He simply did the one thing he knew he could: be there, steadily, quietly, and always. And so, in the heart of a noisy, extravagant city, within an apartment that had once been cold and lonely, there were now the sounds of a child's laughter, the patter of little footsteps down the hallway, bedtime stories whispered late into the night, and a man who once believed he no longer knew how to love, now learning again. day by day, with a boy who had chosen him to be home. One spring morning, as the soft sunlight gently filtered through the white curtains, Liam woke up in a now familiar room, where the walls no longer felt silent like the day he first stepped in. The penthouse had since taken on the shape of a home, not because of its luxury, but because of every little detail. The neatly folded blanket each morning, the tiny cactus on his study desk, and the gentle knock on the door every time Cassian walked into his room. Liam walked out to the living room, where Cassian was reading the newspaper and sipping coffee, a habit he never broke. He looked up, his gaze softening when he saw the boy approaching, his hair still messy and eyes still sleepy. "Good morning, kiddo," he said, his voice deep and warm. Liam sat down next to him, not replying right away. After a moment, he turned and asked as if he'd been thinking about it for a long time. "If I have two fathers, one who's my real dad and one who's not, who do I have to choose?" Cassian paused. The question didn't surprise him, but it cut lightly into the fear he had quietly held all this time. He didn't answer right away. He simply placed his coffee cup down and looked straight into the boy's eyes. "I think you don't have to choose anyone," he said slowly. "You only need to know who's there for you when you need them the most." Liam looked down. He pulled a slightly wrinkled piece of paper from his pocket, the letter Mark had once sent. He had read it many times. In it were sincere apologies, things Mark wanted to do to make up for the past. But to Liam, those things still felt like distance. "I don't hate him," Liam whispered. "I just don't understand why he didn't know I existed, why Mom had to be alone, and why I was left behind." Cassian placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. "I used to ask the same thing. But sometimes, grown-ups aren't good at doing the right thing. They make mistakes. What matters is what you want now." Liam looked up. "I want to stay here, with you, because here, I get stories every night. I get hugged when I have bad dreams. I get called son even without sharing the same blood." Cassian gently squeezed his shoulder, his lips trembling as if to say something, but he remained silent. Inside him, something seemed to dissolve. The fear, the pain, all the doubts that had haunted him since the day this child entered his life. And now, with one simple sentence, Liam had washed them all away. If you were Liam, who would you choose? A biological father, wealthy, powerful, able to give you everything, except the time you once lacked, or a stranger who once intended to help temporarily, but then stayed for good, quietly rebuilding an entire home with his own two hands? If you were Cassian, would you have the courage to face Mark Donovan, the man who once cost you in business, and who now might take away the child you've loved like your own? Would you dare to hold on to a child who doesn't bear your name, who shares no blood with you, just because your heart knows family isn't made from blood, but from presence? Life doesn't always force us to choose between one or the other, but sometimes the way we face those choices defines who we become. Cassian didn't choose Liam because of who his father was. He chose him because of the look in his eyes when he first stood before Evelyn's grave, because of his strength after all the hurt, because of the nights he clung to him like a safe place. And Liam didn't choose Cassian because he was rich or strong. He chose him because he listened, because he was patient, because he was always there, without needing to promise. Perhaps in this world, the most sacred thing isn't finding someone who shares your blood, but finding someone who chooses you every single day. And if it were you, would you choose family or blood? Share your thoughts, because maybe this story is a question meant for you too.